The Siege of Pondicherry was the first military action on the Indian subcontinent following the declaration of war between Great Britain and France. In the American War of Independence, a British force besieged the French-controlled port of Pondicherry in August 1778, which capitulated after 10 weeks of siege. Background: word first reached the French Indian colony of Pondicherry in July 1778 that France and Britain had recalled their ambassadors, a sign that war was imminent. The British colonies had already received orders to seize the French possessions in India and begun military preparations. French defences. Pondicherry was the capital of French India and the largest of France's possessions on the subcontinent. The British would capture all of the other possessions without resistance in 1778. Only Pondicherry was actively defended. The French governor, General Guillaume de Belcom, had at his disposal about 700 French troops and 400 sepoys, and a city whose fortifications were in some disrepair. Pondicherry, as was the case with a number of other European colonial outposts in India, changed hands due to military action several times in the colonial period. Attempts to significantly improve its defences after the last round of battles in the 7 Years' War were frustrated by political infighting in the French colonial administration. In 1778, the outer works of the city were largely incomplete, with significant elements unfinished and parts of the city exposed to direct attack. Belcom immediately set about improving the defences, working as quickly as possible in anticipation of British movements. Key gates were blocked, stockades and gun batteries were constructed along the shore, and anything that might give cover to the British on their advance on the defences was removed or destroyed. Belcom also received additional troops before the British arrived. The garrison from Caracal added about 100 sepoys to the defence, and some of Pondicherry's inhabitants also took up arms. A small French navy was assembled to counteract the small British navy. Admiral Tronjolly took command of the 64-gun ship of the line Brilliant, the frigate Pour Voyeurs and 3 smaller ships, Sartine, Lauriston, and Brisson. The Siege Preliminaries. The British colonial administration in Madras placed General Hector Munro in command of an army of nearly 20,000 men, which began arriving within a few miles of Pondicherry on the 8th of August. By the 20th of August the full army had arrived, the city was surrounded, and siege operations began. The first noteworthy exchange between the forces was a naval encounter. Admiral Edward Vernon's fleet also consisted of 5 ships, carrying slightly less firepower than the French fleet. Vernon commanded the 60-gun ship of the line HMS Ripon, and was assisted by HMS Coventry, HMS Seahorse, HMS Cormorant, and the East India Company's ship Valentine. In a largely inconsequential 2-hour engagement in which Tronjolly was wounded, the French fleet drove Vernon away on the 10th of August. On the 14th of August, French ships spotted 2 unknown sails. They were transport ships of the British East India Company. Their captains, apparently unaware of the hostilities, sailed before Pondicherry with British flags flying. 2 of the French fleet, Pour Voyeurs and Sartine, lazily gave chase. The British merchant ships escaped, but Sartine was captured when she strayed too close to the British squadron on the 25th of August. The loss of parity between the navies was partially made up by the arrival at Pondicherry of the 26-gun frigate Elizabeth, another private ship that had been pressed into service in the French fleet. On the 20th of August, the British fleet, now 6 ships, appeared again. The French fleet, although it had been augmented by Elizabeth, was forced to leave Le Brisson in the harbour due to damage sustained in the first engagement, and was thus at a disadvantage. The next day, Tronjolly sailed the rest of the fleet south. Belcom was surprised and dismayed to learn on the 2nd of September that Tronjolly had sailed for Ile-de-France, leaving Elizabeth and La Pour Voyeurs behind. The British troops were not noticeably active in their siege operations until September. Belcom used the remaining time to further strengthen the defenses, constructing more dikes and ironcladding the powder magazine. He also repeatedly had to stop the ineffective fire of cannon at the distant British positions. Siege operations. On the night of the 1st of September, the British advanced a force of about 300 as cover for engineers to begin siege operations. Two positions were identified for attack: the northwest bastion and the southernmost bastion. Batteries were established to cover this work, and a third battery was placed to the southwest on the 3rd of September that was positioned to enfilade the French defences. Belcom's response was to send out a few hundred men to feint an attack on the southern battery. This drew nearly 3,000 British troops within reach of the French guns, which inflicted significant damage with only a single French death. The British siege operation proceeded throughout September, often under heavy fire. British batteries moved progressively closer to the walls, inflicting heavy damage within the city. The hospital had to be evacuated, and the powder magazine was also emptied. On the 19th of September, a British cannonball killed the commander of the French artillery. By the 24th of September, breaches were beginning to show in the bastions under attack, and by the 6th of October the British trenches had reached the inner ditches, with additional gun batteries doing significant damage along the entire French works. On the 25th of September, the French attempted a nighttime sortie to destroy the southern battery. The effort was abandoned when secrecy was lost and when the company lost its way. A second sortie on the 4th of October was a little more successful. The southwest gun battery was reached while its crew was asleep. The guns were spiked, and some of the crew were slaughtered. Belcom also received a minor injury after a musket ball struck him on the 4th of October, but was able to continue leading the defense. Siege ends between 6 and the 13th of October. The British siege operations continued, but heavy rains hampered them. The British succeeded in draining the northern ditch, which the French unsuccessfully attempted again to flood. On the 14th of October, the walls of the two bastions the British had targeted lay in ruins, and preparations began for an assault. Belcom was also running out of ammunition. After holding a war council on the 15th of October, he sent a truce flag to Monroe the next day. He signed the terms of capitulation on the 18th of October. Aftermath. The French force of less than 1,500 had withstood a siege of nearly 80 days by a British force that numbered 20,000. The defenders' losses were high: more than 300 French and nearly 150 sepoy casualties, along with more than 200 civilian casualties. The British suffered more than 900 casualties. The French defenders were allowed to march out with full colours, and were eventually returned to France. Britain followed up the victory by seizing France's other Indian colonies, contributing to the outbreak of the Second Mysore War.